Hello, ladies and gentlemen. There's a book which called Surrounded by Idiots, which I gotta tell you, it's a great name. Title for the book. And today we will discuss about exactly creative, emotional, curious type of people based from this book. But what I like that in this book they calling different personalities with the different colors, and they using for this kind of people like a high energy, emotional, curious. They calling like author calling these kind of people the yellow type. The person who walks into a room and accidentally becomes the event. You know this person. They don't enter quietly. They arrive. Even when they're late, before you hear their logic, you hear their laugh. Before you see their plan, you see their energy. Before they explain what happened, you already know how it felt. In other words, they get a really like a strong feeling, and that's the yellow. Yellow isn't a thinker first type. Yellow is a feeler, storyteller, hype generator, combo pack. They experience life. It's like a trailer for a movie they're emotionally staring in. How to spot a yellow in real life? You don't so-called analyze yellow. You notice them. They usually talk with the hands, change tone mid-sentence, jump between topics like Netflix recommendations, laugh before finishing their own joke, say things like, wait, I have to tell you something 5 times. They're expressive, animated, emotional, open, sometimes too open. If a room feels like suddenly warmer for no logical reason, yep, yellow just sat down. And yeah, you can think of yellow like a sun, positive, high energy. How yellows think. These parts matter. Yellow thinking is not linear, it's associative. One idea reminds them of a feeling. In other words, idea all the time, link it to some like XYZ feelings. And that feeling reminds them of a story. That story reminds them of a person. That person reminds them of another story. It's like the chain of bunch of stories. So if you're waiting for a clean conclusion, a structured argument, bullet point logic, you're missing the point. Yellow don't process the world as so-called facts first. They process it as experience first. How yellows talk and why they sometimes exhaust you. Yellows speak to connect, not to conclude. Because as you can see, like personal connection really matter for like yellow personality. They're not trying to win, prove, or dominate. They're trying to be seen, be felt, be included. Which is why they interrupt not to be rude, but because excitement arrived early. They exaggerate emotionally, not maliciously. They react strongly because they feel strongly. If a yellow says, for example, this was the worst day of my life, give it 20 minutes. It might become, actually today was kind of funny. Same day, same person, different emotional weather. How yellows text on social media, for example. This is where it gets obvious. Long, then short, then long again. In other words, it's like inconsistency of like the size of like sentences. Have emojis doing half the emotional labor. Include voice messages because it's easier to explain. Use caps for feelings, not aggression. In other words, many, as you can predict, positive emojis. Things like, oh my god, you won't believe this. Okay, wait, listen. So basically, no, I have to send a voice. They don't text to, transfer information. They text to transfer emotion. Silence from you, they will assume you're upset, you're bored, you died, briefly. How yellow social media profile looks, for example. You don't need Sherlock Holmes, just scroll. Typically, yellow profile, bright photos, group pictures, facial expressions, doing cardio, captions that they're stories, not labels. They post moments, feelings, reactions. This made my day energy. Consistency, meh. Aesthetic grid, rare. Emotional authenticity, 100%. In other words, you gotta remember about yellow personality people that they act not most of the time based on logic, but based on feelings, emotions. Their bio might say things like living, laughing, learning. In other words, like even by looking to the bio, you can see that it's like a feeling-based some quote or any text, and they mean it sincerely. How to get yellow's trust, and this is critical and simple. Do not lead with facts, lead with warmth. What builds trust with a yellow? Eye contact, smiling while listening, remembering small personal details, reacting emotionally, not analytically. In other words, you gotta mirror their own behavior. If which is most of the time, yellow people open, you gotta be open as well. Say things like that must have felt intense, not logically speaking. Forget about knowledge, forget about logic. If you acknowledge their feeling, they will listen to your thought later. Miss that step and you just noise. Yellow vulnerabilities, this is where they hurt. Under the sparkle, they're sensitive. Yellows are vulnerable to things like rejection, being ignored, cold communication, feeling unimportant. They often take things personally, overthink social signals, fear being too much. Irony, their biggest strength, emotional openness, is also where they bruise easiest. They don't want applause, they want connection. What not to do with a yellow. Please keep in mind this. If you want to lose a yellow fast, do this. In other words, you gotta be opposite, if you want to lose their trust. Be cold, be dismissive, be sarcastic about their feelings, interrupt their story with get to the point, ignore their messages repeatedly, and the nuclear option, you're overreacting. Congratulations, you just emotionally unplugged the sun. Yeah, it's kind of like you turning sun to the moon. The big misunderstanding about yellows, people think yellows are shallow, chaotic, not serious. That's lazy thinking. Yellows are serious, just about people, moments, and meaning, not systems. They don't lack depth, they access it emotionally, not structurally. In other words, you can think that they kind of got like a strong gut feeling, like intuition. And a final thought, not a summary, just a truth. A yellow doesn't make life efficient, they make it human. They remind us that feelings are data, energy is contagious, Life isn't only meant to be optimized, it's meant to be felt. Handle them with warmth, don't try to cage them with logic, and never mistake their laughter for lack of depth. Sometimes the loudest color is the one keeping the room alive. Thank you for listening. Smash the like button, subscribe button. See you next time.